Jazno Francoeur, if I said the name correctly.
Close, close.
All right,
Francoeur,
cool.
Francoeur.
Amazing. Jazno is BFA Program Director at DigiPen Institute of Technology in Singapore. He's been on this role from 2004. And previously, and that goes back to 1990, he have been working as visual effects animator at Walt Disney Feature Animation from 1990 to 2003. And he has worked on most of my favorite movies back in the childhood, from Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, Pocahontas, Empress New Groove, one of the best animation movie. If someone wants to debate about this, please have me over here. And Milan, Lilo and Stitch, and more. And today's talk is about generative AI for art and animation. So I'm very excited. Please come over on the stage.
Thank you very much. Okay. I'm not sure if that's the right lecture in the monitor, so you might want to... Oh, so I just use this one? Okay, all right. And then, oh, I see. Okay, so I'll just hover around here. All righty. So yes, I live in Singapore. Someone asked me if I was a biker. This is a Ducati jacket, but I don't know how to ride a motorcycle, but hopefully one day. So yeah, to recap, my name is Jazno Francoeur. I've been off and on in Singapore. I came to Singapore in 2008 after having been with DigiPen for about 4 years stateside, and then was there about 3 years. One of the things I do for the company is I help them set up with their foreign ventures. So we, as you probably know, if you've heard of our school, we do have one in Redmond, we have one in soon to be Saudi, and then we have one in Spain, so including Singapore. So I'm based in Singapore right now, which means I'm very close here. That means this is my first time in India. It's absolutely fantastic. I love your country. I actually, this may sound really strange, but I went to a Hindu preschool. So my earliest memories were actually Hanuman and the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. I know that sounds very strange, from Wichita, Kansas. So it's actually kind of strange that I would be talking about generative art at all, because generative art is kind of anathema these days. I don't know how it is in India. I know that IP is a little bit different once you get away from the States. But in the United States, whenever you're talking about generative AI, usually people start immediately thinking about people encroaching on your intellectual property. Now, intellectual property is an interesting idea because the notion of property means that we can put a fence around it. And in America, we have very strong provisions for intellectual property. Basically, once you think an idea, technically, it's already official, right? Things are not as litigious, I would say, as you cross the water, and certainly in Asia, it's a little bit different. So I think we're in the infancy of AI, and we won't know probably for another 10 years really how to utilize it as artists. What I mean by that is, if you look at film, how long did it take film to go from a novelty into actual storytelling art form? It probably took about 30 years. How long did it take games? Well, games actually has only been around for, what, 35, 40. So we're still actually trying to figure out really how to so-called make art with that medium. How long did it take photography? Photography took 50 years. So I've literally only been playing around with these tools for about 3 years. That doesn't even make me a journeyman, hardly makes me an expert. So if anyone says that they're an expert in generative AI, I think that's a bit of a misnomer, because the tools, if you just look at a graph, it's an upward trajectory. It's like Sputnik. Everyone is trying to get to the gold standard, which I think we're kind of already halfway there, which is getting beyond the uncanny valley, and even getting into things that are more stylized. So it's very strange that I'd be talking about it, because I am a 2D animator. I still do work professionally. I still work on movies. But the fact of the matter is, I think like any tool, we shouldn't fear it. We should embrace it. And I think more than anything else, we'll probably end up using it more as an optimization tool. So let's just get the introductions out of the way. I won't go through my whole history, but yes, I did start in Disney when I was 19. I got started straight out of school. I worked on about 12 features, and he mentioned a couple. Probably my favorite was Mulan, just from a design standpoint. And then I would say my favorite from an energy standpoint was Lilo and Stitch, because I really like working with Chris Sanders. I'm not sure how that slide ended up there. Shelter in Place is a film that I worked on with a Korean director, Claire Chun. We were working on this during the pandemic, about the pandemic. Actually went to the Cannes Film Festival, so it was in the Palais. And then also I worked with director Todd Polson on The 21. And this film was shortlisted for the Academy. Unfortunately, we did not get nominated. And then lastly, Light of the World. And then My Hero is a proof of concept that I just finished with director Tom Bancroft. So about 5 years ago, I decided that even though I have a very busy schedule as an educator, I think it's very important as we go back and forth between education and our vocation that we still keep our skills sharp. So for me, even though it was a lot of extra work, I felt like I really needed to do it in order to feel like I actually still had things that were fresh that I could teach my students. The great thing, though, is that a lot of these projects I work on now, I'm actually able to take them to my school. My students are able to help me. And yes, they are paid. So I would say that because I'm a visual effects animator, all of us actually start with character, but because I'm specifically a visual effects animator, I'm not just an artist, I'm also a compositor, and I also think kind of with a technical mind. And it was really kind of cool because even though we were working on 2D films, most of our films is a bit of a misnomer. They had quite a lot of 3D in them. There was a lot of 3D, 2D integration. And there were also a lot of tools that were created, again, to optimize the workflows to make things a bit easier. So I would say my interest in AI is really just an offset or an extension of being interested in those types of processes. So, and here's another thing, too. You really don't want to innovate on a movie. You really want to innovate on a short. And if you look at the history, particularly of animation, all the great technologies from, I would say, from Match Move, to, in Jerry's Game where they were, learning how to render skin, or if you're talking about sound sync with Steamboat Willie, or if you're talking about parallax and the multiplane camera with the old mill, every time there was any kind of innovation, at least on the film side, it was always done at a smaller scale. Now, we have a mantra in education when we teach, and I think that mantra is actually equally true whether you're making games or film, that it's a three-part process. And the last speaker, I think, was speaking very heavily to that. And you can fail in any one of these areas. And so what that is investigation, which is research. And I think research is probably the most important, because if you research something, you're getting away from the derivative. The second part is inspiration. How can I use that research and iterate? How can I do look development? How can I, she had mentioned, show me not just your beautiful work, show me your sketches, show me your process, right? And then, of course, comes the execution, which is, oh, okay, now show me the final piece, show me that beautiful piece in your portfolio. But there's a fourth one, and that's innovation. And innovation is actually the hardest to do, because if everyone could innovate every time they made a film or a game, then there would be no competition for some people. But unfortunately, that's not the way the industry works. And so that's a very tall order in the professional world, almost impossible if you're talking about education, because it's very hard for a company to do it, let alone for one person. But to me, what does innovation mean? Innovation means that when you take on a project, that there's a creative innovation and that there's a technological innovation. So even with movies that are older, like Lion King, obviously we can look at the creative innovation. By the way, we thought that was a B movie. We didn't know it was going to do so well, so we were very pleasantly surprised. But Lion King was Hamlet. That was the armature, and that actually was kind of innovative for the time. But the technical innovation was the wildebeest stampede and trying to get the wildebeest to map the topology and not morph into each other. We were getting like six-legged wildebeest, two-headed wildebeest. So learning how to do kind of like the crowd simulation and procedural art in general, that became kind of an innovation. So for every project that I worked on, there was always something we were trying to figure out, right? So we certainly did a lot of procedural stuff on Brother Bear. Just like Moana, if you guys have seen Moana, you probably noticed that there's a lot of water in that film. Well, much of that water is not animated in sort of a tradigital sense. A lot of that water is actually procedural, because unless it's really important, it's more of an invisible effect, and we kind of need to see it in the background. And that's really true for many of these things. So a lot of these were just kind of collaborations with other technical artists and other people who actually had a deep 3D knowledge. So all of these things, whether it was simulating cloth, or whether it was trying to simulate line work through rendering, or whether it was doing particles, all those things that we worked in concert with people within our department. And so I think in some ways that process really rubbed off on me. And I was always really interested in like, okay, well, making 2D art and 2D animation is interesting, but what are the other things that we can bring to the table to not only optimize the process, but actually make it more interesting? And enter AI. And I think AI comes with a whole host of other issues, right? And I don't necessarily want this talk to devolve into legalities, because those are still being figured out with the class action lawsuits. An ideal world, the people who ended up in these data sets would be remunerated based on the preponderance of their names. That has not happened yet, and I think the first OpenAI lawsuit did lead with some people getting some money, but it really wasn't enough to justify. And of course, now they're also talking about this idea of, now you go to Google, so much of what you see is no longer photographs. So much of what you see is actually AI. So they're saying that the AI is beginning to cycle on itself, and eventually it'll go into model collapse. But I am very interested in this idea of what are the different ways that we could use it in an ethical way. So for me, if I do use it, it is ethical. I don't take money for it. If I give a lecture, I give it away for free, because I'm an educator. I'm really interested in sharing information. I'm not really interested in leveraging my fellow artists' sweat equity, in their respective crafts. But at the same time, technology never goes backwards, right? Genie's out of the bottle. And if we as artists are not embracing this and figuring it out, then we leave it up to hobbyists, and we leave it up to people who maybe don't have the best intentions and or just don't have the skill set. Because this is different. This is no different than anything else. When people always ask me, well, how can I become a really good digital artist? I'm like, well, you need a foundation. Because anyone can learn a tool, especially now with ChatGPT. Anyone can learn software. The hardest thing to learn are those hard foundational skills. And again, the last presenter was talking about that. What are those? It's anatomy. It's tone, color, composition. It's Western linear perspective. It's the 12 principles of animation. Because if I'm an employer and I have a choice between two candidates, one has a stronger foundation but weaker technology, the other one maybe is a gearhead but doesn't have much of a foundation, every time I'm going to go with a person I know who goes beyond that glass ceiling. I'm going to go with a person who's got those foundational skills. So that's kind of like my mindset going into using the tool. As I said, my aim is always to use it in an ethical way. But again, I just have to stress, if it's not the people who are in it and working in the industry, playing around with these tools, then we leave it to other people, again, who may not be, the best actors. So these are just some more examples, crowd simulation. So oftentimes, if you're looking at these movies, again, it's a misnomer. You think, oh, well, it's a 2D film. These were always, to a certain degree, 2D, 3D hybrid films. And of course, we had our own proprietary system, which is called CAPS, so that's also very interesting, right? Because almost all these processes have been deprecated. You get 5 to 10 years beyond any film, those processes don't get duplicated anymore. Specifically because in North America, I don't know about India so much, but in North America, we don't make a lot of feature 2D films anymore. Most of them are 3D. And I guarantee you, coming down the pike, will probably be a lot of like hybrid AI type films. But the point is a lot of the technologies we use to make these films has been deprecated. But the irony is with AI does what? It does nothing but look at data sets on the internet. So what that means is even if it's a deprecated technology, the internet remembers, right? And the more ubiquitous it is, the chances are the stronger it will show up in your work, right? We're going to dig a little bit into what that even means, because people, when they think AI, they always think of just text and prompting. It's a lot more than that, because where I'm coming from is I'm interested in how can I train the AI with the data set with my own work. And there's a lot of companies that really don't have to get into the weeds, right? I'm pretty sure that Blizzard, when they use AI, they're using their own repository. They don't have to worry about stepping on anyone's toes because they own all the IP and they can use it in a way that is probably very ethical for them. But a lot of the things that we were developing weren't just like, things like with particle systems and whatnot, or simulation or procedural art. We also were innovating things like faux plane, which is the ability to take a flat surface and be able to see around it. And then we further took that idea of deep canvas into both Tarzan, Brother Bear. I don't know if any of you saw Tarzan, but all of the vegetation, when he is going in and around, that is all 3D geometry with a 2D texture on it. And what it does is it gives you this idea that it's in the round. So another thing, too, that's problematic, though, if you rush to get a new technology into a game or film, you are running the risk of it looking dated almost immediately, right? Go back and take a look at Toy Story. it's still a wonderful movie, but it's very polygonal. Animation's not great. The rendering is terrible. And that was kind of a maxim in our industry, which is great animation will not fix a bad story, but a great story will survive bad animation. And that is a maxim that's true to this day, right? If we care about the characters, we're willing to suspend some of our disbelief. So again, when we think about starting, I think where we have to start in any industry is we have to start with research. There's no such thing as bad knowledge. And your entry point into using generative AI can be relative to what you do. So for example, I could say, I'm a fine artist. So I'm going to use fine art terms. I'm going to say chiaroscuro. I'm going to say, instead of saying hard lighting, I might say tenebrism, right? Or I might say sfumato. If I'm a CG artist, I might say, well, I'm going to use bloom, or I'm going to use subsurface scattering. So each of those are things that are ubiquitous in the internet, and each of those will return various looks that are similar. So there's no one particular way that you can frame using the technology. I would say one thing, though, for me that's very helpful is if you have a cinematic mind and if you use cameras, that's probably the most helpful thing that you can have. Art history and a knowledge of photography and photographic history. Those are probably the most powerful things that you can have because it's a visual medium, and it's a medium that's based on words. So obviously, we're going to, whenever people use AI, usually they're talking about just a handful of programs. The problem is, like I said, it's a Sputnik moment. Things are moving so quickly. I took 4 months off, just not doing any AI whatsoever, and already there's like new versions of Midjourney, new versions of Runway, there's new programs like Nano Banana. It's just literally impossible to keep up with it. So for those of you who might be brave enough to say, hey, maybe I'll explore some of this, choose just one particular software that does generative art. Choose one particular program that does the generative video and learn how to master those two, because the problem is there's just too many technologies out there. So first I was using Runway, now I've moved on to Google VO3. But the powerful thing about using Midjourney that I like is that it's not just about the text, it's also that you have image prompts, which is essentially like training it. This is where you can train it with your own art. And then you have parameters, and the parameters could be everything from your aspect ratio to other things. And then you have a fourth thing, which are called tools. So there's a lot of different ways that you can influence the render, which are not necessarily specific to text. So typically, when most people do a very generic text, they get a very generic image, because most AI is going to give you something that is in a square aspect ratio. Square, of course, is going to give you very symmetrical renders, and that is typically what you get. But if I took this simple idea of an astronaut in a white suit, standing on a moon, blah, 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 again, I'm going to get something that's okay, but it's going to be derivative. The thing you have to remember is that AI is derivative by nature. It's a postmodern type of making art. But what happens when I just change a few things based on maybe a different culture? Now it's not an astronaut. Maybe it's cyberpunk katakali, right? Maybe now I'm playing with composition by calling it out and saying that I want this to be off-center. Maybe I'm adding other things like optimized photon capture and bulb setting, so I get something that feels like there's some movement. And automatically, just because I have some of that knowledge as a traditional artist, automatically I get something that's less derivative. I'm not saying that is great. I'm just saying that that is the power of knowledge and knowing how to manipulate. So where we started in Midjourney 1 was 2022, and it was just awful, right? The conventional wisdom was that AI could not render hands, it couldn't render teeth, it couldn't render like all those basic things. By the way, within 2 years, they figured it out. 2 years was all it took. Now, it's not to say, one thing I do have to say with any AI, and that's ChatGPT included, you're going to get a lot of results that are not good. You're going to get maybe 60 to 70% efficacy, which means that all AI is ultimately collaborative. But again, look at the quantum leap that we have gone in 2 years. That's why I'm saying this art form, whatever it is in its infancy, and we really don't know where it's headed. Where they say it's headed, this is what they're saying, is that within 5 years, you will be able to tell your smart TV what kind of entertainment you want to see, whether it's animated, live action, what's the genre, what's the music. You're going to have all these different parameters, and it's going to be really weird at first, just like this first iteration down here. But everyone will suddenly become a content creator. And then suddenly we'll be able to get in real time something that is completely so-called new. And 10 years from now, I don't even know where we're going to be. So the question is, if things are going to be that easy, where does art exist? Where in that space does the artist exist? And of course, that's my whole aim here, is to say that the artist still has to be the one behind the scenes running the show. So again, again, look at those figures there, and then look at them here. Look at the quantum leap just within, that was actually within 1 year, by the way. That wasn't even 2. And then of course, there's also what they call the Niji filter, which is kind of manga. I use it in a very different way. But this is what is going on under the hood, and this is what I mean. So these are not necessarily all image prompts. Some of these are actually just physical manifestations of what shows up underneath. So to get that image in the middle, maybe I needed to know a little about Gira tiles. Maybe I needed to know about Islamic aperiodic tiling. Maybe I needed to understand Tiepolo. So instead of saying upshot, I say Tiepolo upshot, because Tiepolo did those freezes where you have the forced perspective. But I'm throwing in some CG. I've got Octane render. I'm even mentioning an ubiquitous camera. The point is that all those things collectively and how you weight them will eventually get you the image that's in the middle. So that would be the example. Again, I am not saying any of this is great. And all of this is just play. It's just experimentation. It's just research. But same thing here. So this is trying to get, again, away from the derivative into imagery that might be even a little bit more fine art. Now, in this case, I had direct permission from these artists. They're friends of mine. They said, yes, for this demonstration, you can use this. So in many ways, their style is kind of driving the style. But, you know, even these ideas of thick impasto, so impasto is just the thickness of the paint. Interestingly, the internet understands that, right? So I'm going to get 50% of my results are going to actually get something that looks like it has dimensional paint. And of course, there's some tricks. A lot of these are photographer tricks, which I'll go over in just a second. So again, this is the finished image. So you've got to think like a camera. Now, I gave a whole series of lectures on camera and generative art. And I was told from the beginning, well, doesn't understand numerical data, doesn't understand f-stops, doesn't understand focal lengths. And actually the fact is I will tell you, anytime there's a new piece of technology, never just read the documentation and believe that it's, you know, the ipsissima verba of God. It's not true. Because oftentimes if it's a new piece of technology, just like AI, it's a black box. The people who made it don't even quite understand it. We understand forward diffusion. We just don't understand backwards diffusion. There's a lot of stuff going on that's just really kind of mysterious. But the fact is that I discovered that a lot of what they were saying in their own documentation was not true just because I did my own research and I experimented and I iterated. And I discovered that, yes, maybe it doesn't understand a more nuanced focal length, but it's certainly going to understand 35 millimeter. Why? Because that's ubiquitous. 50 millimeter, ubiquitous. And another thing about AI that it loves redundancy. If you can say the same thing in 3 different ways, if I can say bulb setting, but then maybe I can also give some kind of a focal length, or maybe I can give other types of things to reinforce that idea. Because again, you're going to get results. It's like fishing. It's going to take a long time. This idea that you just sit down and automatically make great work, it's not true for any art form. You have to be able to get into a flow state. And to me, that is ultimately what all art is about, a flow state. Whether that's music, whether that's athletics. Maybe some of you are runners, and sometimes you're running along and you realize, oh my gosh, I've been running for the last 30 minutes, and I completely zoned out. It's like a runner's high, we call it. Well, you know, hopefully that doesn't happen too often when you're driving, but it even happens when you're driving, right? Sometimes I'll be coming home and I'll be like, how did I even get here? Because it's an autonomic function. I'm just so used to it. But it's that autonomic function where the magic happens. That, when you go into a flow state and you're not aware of what you're doing, means that you're actually being creative. So when people make these grand declarations about that you can't be creative with AI, well, I heard the same thing when CG came around. I'm old enough to remember the digital revolution and the information revolution. I'm old enough to remember when calculators were not used, because that was considered cheating, right? But like I was telling my colleague here the other day, if you go back and look at Greek mythology, Mnemosyne was the most important muse, and that's where we get the word mnemonics from. Why was that important? Because back in the day, the oral tradition was very important. Memory was important. But now, if I were to tell you what is the most important part of intelligence, or how we measure it, if I told you it was memory, you'd probably say, well, that's not really true. Maybe that's a small part of it. Because we have the written word now. It's not as important. So I think every time there's any kind of automation, whether that's a self-driving car or whether that's even just having a car versus, say, a mule-driven plow, there's always some old skill that gets deprecated and there's some new skill or some skill that gets freed up, right? Now that we have all the stuff that's automated, that's the million-dollar question. What is freed up? What do I actually have the time to do? So when I say photographer tricks, that's what I'm talking about. If I just look at this with a normal prompt, but then I think, what if I approach this as if this was a camera? What if I give it hard lighting? What if I actually think about the depth of field? What if I think about zooming into it? What if I change it to golden hour? Just changing those technical parameters can give me something that's more interesting. So each of these are just iterations of where I started and where I iterated to just by talking about process alone. So this is a really good example. So this is what I call the lonely person. Midjourney is very good at this. It gives you the lonely person in the middle of the picture, particularly if you're using a square format. Now what happens if I open it up to, you know, a 2:1 aspect ratio or a 16:9 aspect ratio? Suddenly I get asymmetry. What if I change the lighting from diffuse and I change it to golden light? Same thing with a glass down there. Well, the glass is just diffuse normal lighting, but then suddenly if I say specular highlights, subsurface scattering, octane render, all those things that are tricks in photography are also tricks, as it turns out, when you're using a camera. So having the understanding of natural light, having the understanding of three-point lighting, all those things that we do in cinema are completely and totally relevant once we're getting into this. And that would include, you know, things like backlight, bottom light. Again, AI is very language-driven. It's very sensitive to language. What it is not sensitive to, like I said, is a lot of really strict numerical data. But this is really the heart of it, and this to me is what's interesting. So if we look at the renders there completely to the right, I'm actually not adding any emotional verbiage to this prompt. The only thing that I'm doing is adding more technical processes. So earlier when I talked about things that were deprecated, I'm adding gum bichromate print, right? That was a photographic analog process that was deprecated like over 100 years ago. But now I can resurrect a lot of those things, and just by adding those processes without anything else, I get something that actually has a level of drama and a level of intensity. And that would include printing methods, a lot of these analog printing methods that went the way of the dinosaur. And again, the more ubiquitous the camera, the more common it is, the more that you're going to move the needle. Now, you have to understand it's not one-to-one. You're going to get 70% efficacy at best, and that is still with doing a lot of iterations. But you have to go through this process if you want to make something that's going to be less derivative. So another thing I play around with is specialty cameras, right? Could be X-rays. So this would be an example, because your ubiquitous focal lengths are 24, 35, which is closer to the human eye, 24 being your wide angle, and then of course having the 200 millimeter or your extreme depth of field type lens, your telephoto lens. And you can actually see that you get some approximation. It's not perfect, but you actually do get the depth of field that you would see in a typical lens. So again, this is just my process. You could have a totally different one. It would be equally valid. Maybe your approach to it would be technical processes that are relevant and germane to your career. But this, and this is, by the way, this is very nuanced. This is something that only if you're really a trained artist or a trained photographer, you probably wouldn't even notice a difference. So the one above would be just like a pure render with no lens. But the moment, if you look on to the right over here on the bottom, suddenly by adding 35 millimeter, an interesting thing happens. What it does is it's not just pulling data sets from that focal length. It's pulling all the data sets of artists who are very famous who use that. So, and again, unfortunately, did any of these artists get buy-in? Absolutely not. There was no permission asked. But at least I'd say with OpenAI, they at least, while I believe it's still open source, you can actually see what those data sets are. You cannot with Midjourney. It's kind of like their secret sauce. So again, you could affect that render through anything. You could affect it through adding photographic lenses. And you can actually see the difference. Again, notice the difference just by changing my cinematic lens over to something more cinematic, I get something that's actually much, much more interesting. And even something like film. No one uses film anymore. Film is an old analog process. But there were so many different types of film that just disappeared overnight when photography went to digital. But we can now use these deprecated processes, whether it's warm or whether it's a cool film stock. And again, so long the internet has a really good memory, it's going to actually pull those from there. Now, one thing it does not understand, it has a really hard time understanding shutter speed. Particularly, it doesn't understand in terms of, I would say it doesn't understand the numeric values of shutter speed. But again, there's different ways. If you fail to get the result that you want, then just go back to describing it, and you can still get the same result. So again, this was achieved through using optimized photon capture, using the bulb setting, 85 millimeter lens, all those different types of effects, not necessarily in the verbiage, but in the technical parts of the prompt. And by the way, some of these are very old renders. I mean, this was actually back when AI was having a hard time rendering hands, at least with certain programs. DALL-E, which has now been deprecated, or DALL-E 2, actually was very good because they pulled from more photographic data sets. So what I used to do is I would actually render my hands in a separate program, and I would actually cobble them together in Photoshop. So even something as nuanced as a flash, when you're talking about colorimetry or you're talking about color, don't just call out the colors in color theory, but you can actually affect the color any number of ways. Now again, it's not going to recognize Kelvin, it's not going to recognize that, but what you can do, particularly with Midjourney, is you can extract a color palette. You can do this with Adobe Color. I don't know if anyone has used this program, but if you use Adobe Color, you can extract the color palette, and then you can extrapolate from that, and you can apply it onto your renders. So this is actually a very common practice today for those who are using it. Another thing that you can do is you can call out a very particular color scheme. So it could be tetradic, it could be square. And again, within the 70% efficacy, it's going to hit those results. So color LUTs, color post-processing, color dynamics in terms of color grading, all of those things the internet remembers, and so it's very easily applied. Sorry, that's the wrong slide. Very easily applied once you get into that. So what I want to show now is like, I do want to show how I use some of my own art and how I drive some of these renders with my stuff. This was actually in the very beginning when they first started figuring out how to do interpolations between keys. So this was a series that I was experimenting with. We are so far beyond this. This was really when video was kind of in its infancy. But again, I've always been interested in the intersection of more like, I would say fine art and experimental video, not necessarily entertainment. So even to get to the result of that color image was a real process, right? It took not just iterating on one idea, but 4 parallel ideas. And then eventually, the one at the very end, believe it or not, that's being driven by math. I started playing with math equations to give me different types of randomness and distortions. But usually when I begin anything, I start with a research. So I start with something more technical, in this case, scanning confocal microscopy, right? And then these are just the different parallel iterations that are happening. Before you can even get into the flow state, you've got to figure out, what are the materials that it even understands. So again, these are the 4 parallel tracks, eventually culminating in this. And then I began experimenting with math and seeing how different equations are taken into the program. And then the result is actually something quite different. This is actually using the Niji filter. So the one that you saw earlier, which is typically used for manga, I use it to give me stuff that's a little bit more graphical. So again, this is just all in the service of trying to use AI in ways that are not common. There's such a preponderance of bad AI on the internet. It's everywhere now. You cannot avoid it. I'm not interested in the photoreal. I'm really actually interested more in the graphical. So I'm really interested in the more experimental and the more kind of design related, I would say. So this would be an example. And I'm not sure. Okay, it's a little loud. Sorry, you might want to turn that down. These are just tests, by the way. So all I'm doing is I'm just discovering, well, what's a new technology within a particular program? And in this one, Runway was you were able to interpolate between 2 different keys, and then eventually that went to 3 keys, and now it's even more. So now you're able to extend your renders, and you're now able to interpolate between them. We don't have to watch this whole thing, but this is just kind of an example of, so my tests are not just testing the graphical. The cool thing about what you make in generative AI, that also becomes repurposed when you move into making generative video, right? Okay, we'll go to the next one. So this is experimenting with 2D inputs. So I was taking some of the work I did in Mulan. So the cool thing about Mulan is we had an entire year of just doing visual development. That rarely happened, but that was because the film was very particular, and we actually hired a lot of Chinese artists to help us. So, and I was also doing some character stuff as well. At this point, actually, we hadn't even decided on the style for the film, so this is, you're seeing something kind of weird. You're seeing the style of Pocahontas on Mulan characters, because we didn't even know it was going to be curvilinear at the time. Anyway, so I was just taking some of these and experimenting, like, well, what are some of the results I might get if I was to pull that into a program? So if I have a photographic input as a URL input, and I combine that with a graphical image, I'll get the exact same silhouette. So that's kind of an interesting idea. But again, I'm not really interested in the photoreal. I'm much more interested in the graphical. So, and again, each of these technologies almost has already been deprecated. The cool thing is that AI and all these programs, they always save the previous versions. And I'm sure any software is like that, right? So by the time I get to the end, I'm actually able to get some sense of the color palette and some sense of the silhouette and shape language that I had in my concept, and now I'm beginning to drive the results with that. So now, and by the way, this is not great. Again, these are just tests. It's just experimenting. So the cool thing about doing visual development is you develop everything. So characters, visual effects, props. So in this case, this was a cannon that was on the cutting room floor. So I just kind of threw that in and was seeing, you know, well. So I think this is actually one of the most powerful things that you can do with AI right now is kind of reskinning or retexturing work that you've done. So again, you still maintain your shape language and you still maintain the integrity, but you're actually able to very quickly apply a different style or a different type of artistic method onto it. So then this is, again, getting away from the photoreal, trying to imagine extrapolating more in that style. So I actually did the other one with ink and markers, and you can actually see that it's retaining some of those aesthetics. But mostly I'm a VFX artist. This is what I love to do. Now I love the last talk and concept, because so much of what she was saying resonated with me, which is one of the reasons you do concept art half the time, it tells you what you don't want to do, because it tells you how much money you don't want to spend. So in the beginning of Mulan, originally we were going to have this big cloud bird morphing into some creature blowing the huge tidal waves on the Great China Sea. And then the directors looked at the concept like, or maybe we can just ditch that altogether, right? So at any rate, but I still have all the old concepts, and I was like, well, now I can get one-to-one, by the way, a one-to-one render, which you were not able to do in the beginning. So what you see on the right is just an upscale digitized version extrapolated from that. But I could take that and I could turn it into a hokusai print. I could put just about any style I want. Now, if we had had these tools back when I was doing visual development on Mulan, we could have saved so much time. And I'm not saying it would have impacted the integrity of the film. A lot of people are really afraid to use these tools right now. But that is a powerful visualization tool where I wouldn't have to wait a whole week to know if it worked or not, right? That's what I mean when I say it's an optimization tool. This is actually some of the very first development of the avalanche of Mulan. And as you can see, this is just kind of the iteration here to the right. I personally, my favorite way to draw is on a whiteboard, because I get this big range of motion. I was actually talking to an artist earlier saying that we've got to get away from noodling and doing this sort of thing and get into holding your pencil like this. And the whiteboard for me is great because you get this range of motion, but it allows you to have all that power. But the cool thing is now I can take those whiteboard drawings, and even those can actually drive not just the art, they can actually drive the animation. So this is my buddy Travis. He actually was the one who did the assassins in the movie. So he and I were both doing this demo. I did the avalanche, he did the assassins. So then what happens when we combine those elements in the whiteboard drawing? We get something close. It's still a simulacra, but it's not completely there yet. But, so this would be a gesture. This would be a Sharpie gesture that I did maybe in about, 10 minutes. And then, again, seeing how that might, reskinning it, so to speak, so see how that might look. Again, I wish I'd had this tool back in the day because it's very powerful. And this would be an example. Earlier ones were curvilinear, but what if I want a rectilinear design? And that's always been the gold standard in animation. When people talk about, oh, I'm really afraid of AI taking over 2D animation, that's still not going to happen anytime soon, because in order to get a rectilinear design into any kind of animation that makes any sense, that's non-character, that has a high level of mutability, it's very, very difficult. So I think we're still very far away from that. I almost fear that you need some form of super intelligence. And this is a different experiment. Here I'm actually taking stuff that I did on my iPad, so it's digital, and I'm using the animation there to actually drive the design. And then I'm kind of going in a full circle, because then I'm kind of taking that, playing around with it, and then I'm kind of cycling back and then applying that result onto the animation that I just did, which I'll explain here in just a second. So this was just a series of, this was actually during the pandemic. I was doing these avalanche demos. But the reason I want to show this, and again, you can turn that down just a little bit, it's probably just a little bit loud. But I just wanted to show the whole process, because I think for me, this is where the joy is, right? The joy of all art always starts here, which is that just kind of flow state, and it's gestural, and you're just playing with energy, and you're playing with shapes. And so that's something that I always want to retain. It's something I never want to leave. That's not something I want to leave on the cutting room floor. So to me, if I'm going to use AI in any way, I still want this to be part of my process. So to start with that, and then what did I say in the beginning? I said it starts with research. Well, I don't have to research the avalanche stuff, because I've been in this business over 30 years, so I already have all that stuff in my head. I have like a quiver, if you will, of research that I can call upon. So that box is already checked. What I'm doing here is the inspiration part. What do I do with that research, right? How do I do the look dev? How do I iterate on that research to make these shapes look interesting? Or how do I build a particular style into that? And then, of course, what was the third thing I said? The third thing I said was execution. And by the way, I'm still in the look dev stage, so I'm just playing around with animation at this point. Another thing I like to do, and I learned this actually on Lilo, is I actually animate with the Sharpie, because you can't erase it, and it forces you to not get precious. I think as artists, sometimes we get very precious with our art, and we don't want to, we think that, oh my gosh, I've got to erase this doesn't look very good. But try animating or drawing with like ink or something that is more calligraphic, and you don't have those choices. So, so it's one of the reasons I do that, because I think it gives the animation more urgency, and that is still part of my pipeline. The only difference is, I was just doing this for the sake of the demo. I actually don't flip and paper anymore. I actually use Procreate. Now, there would have been a time when people would have been upset by that. They'd be like, oh, well, traditional animation's gone. Now people are using Procreate. Oh my God. What are you going to do? You can't win. Every time there's some new technology, there's going to be one on the horizon. I'm sure 30 years from now, there's going to be people saying, oh, remember the good old days when you could just do a prompt and you could just input data, and now they're doing stuff in holograms, you know? So who knows, you know? And we've always been software agnostic at our school. I've always said that, like, you know, don't get too wrapped up in technology, because the technology is just a tool. That's it. It's just a tool. The only thing that matters is the foundation that you bring to it. So now we're at the stage where we talk about execution. Execution is, we've gone through the research, we've gone through the look dev part, the inspiration, and now we're into making the artifact. Again, that's parlance in educational terms for the beautiful thing you see at the end, right? Which means it's the containable, paintable shape. It's here to suspend your disbelief. And this is just showing some of that process, which is very different. So now I switch from drawing like this. Now I'm drawing on my iPad like this. I usually work standing up too, so when I come home, I just stand and I draw. And lately, actually, I just finished a movie. I actually did most of that movie standing at a bar, not kidding. So now suddenly I'm talking over the AI stuff. So at the very end, you saw AI. That was no different than my animation. All that was different, it was taking my timing and my design and was just reskinning it, right? And so I was doing that because I have an avalanche sequence in a short, and so now I'm doing some viz dev for that. So these are just tests. So this is just some recent stuff. And again, I'm just playing around. I'm just trying to figure out, well, can I do a style that is a little more interesting, a little less derivative? So I'm just playing with parallax. I'm playing with different cameras. I'm playing with consistency of characters, and I'm playing with a very difficult style. So this is just on that side, but the biggest part of the set piece is an avalanche. As it happens, outside of Seattle, we had the worst avalanche in American history. About 99 people died in a place called Wellington. It actually kind of blew that place off the map, but you can still go to this day and you can see the wreckage of it. So this is just trying to tell that story. But again, remember what I said earlier? Shorts are good for experimentation, and that's all I'm doing. I'm just playing with, this was a new tool that they had in Runway Turbo 3, where you could interpolate between not just 1 or 2 keys, you could interpolate between 3. So, and I think, if anything, I do think where AI is right now, it's certainly good enough to do credits, like title credits or that type of thing. Certainly anything graphical like this. So this is just playing around with kind of like a stylized avalanche. Again, all this is driven by traditional. So I just showed you one example of one of the scenes, that scene right there. But all these other ones, everything is also being driven by traditional. And it gives you a bit more finite control. So again, these are just tests. So then this would show the process. There you see the original, and there you kind of see what it looks like here. So what has changed? Well, the rendering, the texturing. Has the timing changed? No. Has the shape language changed? Not at all. So it's actually quite a process. You've got to kind of fool the AI. Sometimes you've got to make something black and white because the AI is not going to really read it unless you do that. And then that allowed me to kind of go in and create this other kind of layer of architectural texture. And I'm not going to bore you with the details because I do think I'm running out of time, but I at least wanted to go through that process. And then also just to create the plates for this, remember I was saying earlier that AI loves redundancy. So there's a lot of the same thing being said multiple times within that prompt, both in terms of URL images, which is the training data, and the actual verbiage itself. And then, like I said earlier, playing with the math equations, trying to get some of that. So these were just tests. This is interpolating between those 3 keys. So if you look in Runway, this is what it looks like. You can see the 3 below there, and you can see the result, and then basically what it does. And then it allows you to even change camera, allows you to do all sorts of things. But again, this would be an example of taking a whiteboard drawing. This is a demo I did for my students. And then taking that into an AI. And then playing around also with just different styles. So again, what you see here on the right is the traditional, and these would just be iterations of that. Sometimes I'll do demos that are just pastel, or, but again, it's just wonderful that with just maybe 5 minutes of experimentation, I can see a manifestation of what this might look like more as a photoreal element. And then what I can do, so if we actually look at the genesis, again, there's no research part here because I'm drawing off a muscle memory. So here I'm just doing my initial sketch. I sped this up a little bit. I'm doing that in Procreate. That's being extrapolated into Midjourney. And then from Midjourney, then it's being put into Runway. So all of this is being driven by traditional whiteboard and drawings done by hand. Now, there's still some coloration issues. None of that would be good enough for the film business at all. None of that would be really even good enough from a fidelity standpoint. And then, and here I was just playing with scale, so I just wanted to do kind of more like a tsunami sequence. So if this is an area of experimentation you're interested in, it's also very good to become an editor and understand editing. But in this case, I wanted to do something that was a bit more stylized. And it looks like my time's up, so I'm just going to show a couple more things, and we'll do maybe a little Q&A. And then, again, just doing it with, one of the things I was trying to get to was game stuff, right? So how can I use this to develop things that I can generate in Runway that I can then turn into sprite sheets that I can then bring into Unreal. So right now my pipeline is this. I go from 2D, I go from my iPad, I go into Midjourney, then Runway. Then I go from Runway back into Niagara. All right, so I'm just going to stop there. Thank you, everybody. Are there any questions about any part of this presentation? Do not be shy. Okay, so you got all that. You guys are experts. That's fantastic. I expect to see really great results. Oh, come on now. I'm a teacher. I'm going to get an answer from I'm going to get someone to ask a question. Ajit, I know you have a question. Anyone? Yes. Maybe a microphone over here.
So at last you mentioned about the pipeline of integrating VFX in Unreal Engine.
Yes.
So how you go about that? You start with a sketch, and then do you draw parts of it?
So what you just saw at the end is a perfect example. So yeah, I start with like a sketch, take that into Runway, or take that into Midjourney, use the plate to drive the animation, take the animation, turn that into a sprite sheet, use the sprite sheet to drive, and then I add different materials and shaders, of course, in Niagara. So it's a way of getting very sophisticated sprite sheets without having to take all the time to make them.
Okay, can you show some work?
Unfortunately, I had a whole lot more, but it was on my other presentation that I was not able to load up. But I had some examples of like fire and some other ones. Let's see, maybe I do have another one. Let me take a quick look here. No, the other ones are just other videos. But if you email me, I could send you some other examples.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, over here.
First of all, thanks for the wonderful talk. I just have, I don't come from a artist background. I'm someone from the data analytics side. I just have one question, like how do you maintain, say you drew one character, say for your movie, like a Mulan or something, and then how do you try and keep that character consistency within different scenes if you're using Midjourney?
So that actually is part of the presentation I don't have time for, but it's actually in this presentation. So specifically, and every program is different, but if you work in Midjourney, originally it was a parameter called cref. And cref, what it does is it allows you to take that character and keep absolute consistency with the costume and with lighting and the style from scene to scene. So it's, in addition to using the parameters, you can continue to use images that you put into the data set to help influence the final render as well. Now that parameter is called oref. There's also another one called sref. Sref is a style. So in addition to keeping consistency with the character, you can keep consistency with the style. So by using those two parameters, you can get consistency in your environments from shot to shot, your effects from shot to shot, and your characters. I don't know how it's done with, every program is going to be different. If you're using Comfy UI, that's going to be node-based. But specifically with Midjourney, those are the parameters that you would use to do it. So it's actually relatively easy. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
So, yeah, for the first time I'm seeing traditional animation is getting into Midjourney and as a beautiful, AI-generated one. So what's my question is, the videos, whatever you have generated is amazing, but when it is, when we are putting into the game, the size issues are there. So what is your solution for that?
Well, that's why I was just kind of scratching that issue at the very, very end, right? Because if you're using the art to generate the sprite sheets, which then you take that into the pipeline, obviously the sprite sheet is not going to be like super high resolution, right? Because it's going to chug. So I want that to be optimized. But by the time it gets into the game engine, then I'm free and clear to do what I need to do, right? So it's really using it more as a creative tool to get sprite sheets that might be more interesting. And that's specifically if I'm doing a project that's 2.5D. Now, admittedly, I've only been playing around with blueprints in Niagara for the last 1.5 to 2 years. So that's the next piece of the puzzle I want to figure out is now how can I use that pipeline, the 2D pipeline, and bring it back into the pipeline with a game engine, specifically Unreal though. I don't use Unity. So I think Unreal is probably a bit more intuitive for artists. And it's not necessary that you know blueprints, but I took it anyway. I took that class because I wanted to understand state machines and all that good stuff. But Niagara is a very powerful tool, and there's a lot of stuff that you can do just in terms of augmenting those sprite sheets once you get it into the engine. Other questions? Yes, question over here.
Hi. So while
Hi.
these are primarily for 2D, do you think there are tools for 3D as well?
Yeah, well, so there's one called Meshy, you've probably heard about.
Yeah.
And I think the 3D right now is where 2D was about 2 years ago. But I think 2 years from now, I think things like rigging and texturing, and the topology that I'm seeing from Meshy is actually unbelievable, considering that it's text-based.
It's
So
updated.
it's already pretty sophisticated, but it's coming a little bit later to the game. So I think, and I think it's every part of the process. I think everything is going to, in some way, have to answer to some form of optimization or some relationship with how AI can augment it or help it. But anyone that I know who is, say, a character artist who works in the industry, they've definitely adopted AI, and a lot of it's proprietary, so they can't talk about it. We were talking earlier about my friend John Hermanowski. 30% of his job is now AI. And I actually was one of the first people to sit him down and like show him. Now he could probably teach me a thing or two, because how they're using it, they can't talk about it. It's all proprietary and it's all therefore NDA. So since I'm not in the game industry, I wish I could be a fly on the wall because I could probably give a better answer. But I can tell you, as we speak, there's definitely, every company is going to have its own proprietary system and,
Do you
and how they're
think
using
2D
it.
is a little more creative than 3D is right now?
Right now,
Yeah.
but
That'll
2 years
change?
from now, no. I mean, eventually everything is going to plateau.
Yeah.
But right now, everything, well, I think, again, I said earlier, it's only been around for 3 to 4 years,
It's fair.
which is, no one's an
Not a
expert,
lot of
right? But you can bet your bet on dollar, there are a lot of companies putting millions and billions of dollars into AI to try to figure this out, because everyone wants to have first mover's advantage, and everyone wants to have the technology that's going to give them the fastest and the best results. But I will say one last thing. I think there's this idea, I keep saying optimization, but there's this idea that it's going to save time. You know, we thought the same thing about 3D. Like when, to make a typical Disney movie was like $80 million for a cheap film, maybe another $50 million to market it. 3D did not change anything. It still takes exactly the same amount of time to make a 3D movie. And now if you look at the credits, there's like 5 times more people.
Yeah.
So if anything, what I've seen with technology, it actually creates more jobs than it takes away. It's just initially there's going to be those growing pains of like, oh my gosh. And of course, I've had people walk out of talks because I've had to say, well, if you're a 2D artist, you will have to learn it, because the other person who has embraced it will be the one who gets the job. And it's not because they're an AI artist, it's because they're an artist who knows AI. There's a difference. Good
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah. Any other questions? These are all great questions, by the way. And I do not pretend to be an AI expert. I'm just having fun and experimenting.
Yeah, you could try with
Hello.
Hey.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
So I just want to ask you a question just based on the ethical side of this when it comes to applying for jobs, as you
Yes.
mentioned. So like I'm in the concept art side of things. You just had an image over there showing your concept art of a cannon, how it was drawn and painted using flat colors, and how you
Yeah.
used AI to finish it up, basically.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about the idea of using that, and it takes a lot less time for me to maybe finish that up the way you just finished it.
Right.
But these days, I mean, portfolios don't really want to see any amount of AI used in your images, so how could I maybe show my employer that this is something usable?
I mean, like I said, it's so touchy right now, right? And there are some companies like ArenaNet, for instance, like the lead art director there. He's like, it's not that we're anti-AI, but we just don't adopt it at all into our pipeline. So there are some companies that go out of their way to say that we don't do it, and therefore we don't want to see it. I think that just comes through research and finding out, like, because as you know, every company is different. Every company has their own ethos. Every company has their own pipeline that's different. And every company has different hiring practices and things that they want. AI is tricky in that I can't think of I mean, if you were to use it in any way, there would have to be absolute, utter transparency, right, to show that process. But the reason it's tricky is because a lot of there are so many companies that are requiring it now. So I would imagine at some point it will become an industry standard for them to show what they're looking for. Right now they're not, just because everyone's just kind of taking a back seat. But again, I know for a fact plenty of industries, particularly game industry, where people I know, whether they're environment artists or character artists or concept, it's already part of their pipeline. I would say for concept art, Comfy UI is probably one of the more common ones. I have some friends at Lucasfilm. They adopted Comfy UI a year and a half ago. Of course, how Lucasfilm uses that software is going to be very different. You know, they're going to use the skin of it and have their own eggheads and make it their own. But I really don't know how to answer the question because I think it's still too early days, but I think it'll become more and more transparent. But like, for instance, I don't know that my friend John Hermanowski would probably say, his company probably would not say, oh, we're looking for AI artists, right? Because I think in their mind, like, we'll just take you as is and we'll train you because it doesn't take very long. So I think that's what's happening right now. So I would say probably avoid AI in concept especially, unless specifically in the company there's some way that they would want you to showcase that skill set. Yeah. These are all excellent questions. Any others? Yes, one over here.
So I come from the growth side of the business, and I was wondering, see, I see that all these implications are great for, let's say, some cinematic implications would be really awesome. But when it comes to like small snippets or ad kind of things that specifically for mobile games, how do you see that being different from what you've shown to us?
I mean, obviously I'm going to have a more cinematic bent because that's where I come from. But just from my 20 years of being associated with a game school, I can't imagine. I mean, again, it's just a tool. So it would have limitless uses and no matter where you're coming from. So a person who you might want to follow who could probably answer those questions better and actually has a lot of stuff on his LinkedIn that showcases it. His name is Rory Flynn, R-O-R-Y Flynn. And he actually comes from advertising. And so because he has an advertising bent, that's the prism through which he does all of his innovation. Like I said, everyone will use a tool according to where they're coming from. I do not come from advertising. And again, I obliquely work with games. I mean, I am a game art director in Saudi, but that is not the same as saying I work in game or actually work in your field. But there are, I would say that just as much as I have an interest in this area, there are experts in these various fields who absolutely could answer that question better. Any other questions? All right. And I know this is the last talk of the day. You guys have been very patient.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time, guys.